Well, hello, and what I'm doing right now is I'm taking a look at the astrology going on right now. If we look at the moon, we're in an interesting time of the lunar phase right now because we're approaching what's called the balsamic phase, the last crescent waning moon before the new moon. And what's interesting about this is that this is not only a new moon in Cancer, but this is a funny time where we have two new moons in the same sign this year, right? If you want to back it up, like check this out. Well, this it'll be easier. First of all, this is today what we have up on the screen, and just a couple days. See the moon's approaching the sun there. Bam, we got a new moon in Cancer. Not only that, but the new moon is happening when the sun is completely opposite to Saturn. Now, but to kind of illustrate what happened with the eclipse, let's go back here. So, well, here we go. So, when the sun was in Gemini, we had a similar thing going on. The last crescent moon coming towards the sun here. They're almost conjoined in Gemini. There's the sun on the north node at 29 Gemini on June 20th. And then around then, they both kind of ingress into. It's right at the cusp, basically, of Capricorn. So it's kind of like it's really it's kind of a question of, I mean, I guess it is a new moon in Cancer, right? But it's these kind of new moon on the cusp here. But it was like what we're counting it as a solar eclipse in Cancer, the last of the solar eclipses in Cancer for a while, as they're all moving into Gemini now. Here we go. Here's a good. You can see them both at the 0 degree um, of Cancer there, where we with Mercury retrograde on June 20th. So that was the eclipse. And now if we go, let's hit the refresh button here, and now if we see what's happening here on July 20th, exactly a month later, another new moon. Well, I mean, new moons happen on a monthly cycle, so that's not a surprise. But we're having two new moons in Cancer, and then we have the moon first going into Leo, and then the sun heading into Leo as well, starting off Leo season. And then it'll be kind of interesting because then if you keep going, Leo season again closes with another new moon here, right? So there's the sun's still in Leo, then we get a new moon in Leo on August 18th, around there. Um, Now there's certain significance to this. Mainly, if we put it back up here, the biggest thing that is of significance is not only is it kind of an odd thing to have two new moons in Cancer. If you're wondering, like, what does that mean to have two new moons in the same sign? Well, part of it is how the new moon timed up. The new moon was right on the 0 degree, um, and so it's like it's nearly on the 0 degree of Leo, but not quite, kind of thing. And also what's kind of interesting was the timing of it wasn't just a new moon on the 0 degree, but it was a solar eclipse. So it's I mean this isn't it's kind of what there's this kind of symbolism here of this is like the peak summer season of 2020, a year where things are kind of topsy-turvy and turned on their head, and as a result of this, summer doesn't really feel very much like summer. I know in Vancouver, around where I live, I'm on Vancouver Island now, but like a common thing around this time of year is they had the Car Free Day festival, where it originally started on Commercial Drive, but then eventually expanded out to other streets where they basically close off big portions of the streets and have these big summer block party things going on. And it's obviously that's not happening with the lockdown. There's a lot of other summer festivities and summer festivals that have been kind of squashed due to the lockdown going on. And rather than looking at this as being a question of how is it difficult to do astrology under the lockdown, because the lockdown puts, all these things that people would be interpreting otherwise you have to like dance around the lockdown. Well, it's I think that it's part of the part of that whole dynamic you can see with the astrology here, namely the sun in Cancer representing, this is sort of like this summer season, right? Um, Being opposite to the big lineup of Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in Capricorn, a winter sign. To the point where it's actually kind of interesting here in BC too. The weather, it looks like the weather is picking up the temperature over the course of the next week. That's probably, now they're going to Leo season. Maybe that has something to do, well, that this is generally when it gets hot is in late July into August. But this has been a strangely cool and temperate and July here in BC. I'm not complaining though, because in the past we've had a lot of forest fires, so it's nice to it's nice that amongst all the calamities we're dealing with, one thing that we don't have to deal with in BC here in the summer is forest fires, so that's nice. Um, However, there's all sorts of other problems that are an issue. I was just reading a post in Vancouver about how the city's passing an ordinance that makes it okay for people to camp out in parks if they're homeless, because it's like there's so many people that are doing it that people need to survive. They need to go somewhere. And we're also seeing the similar thing in the neighborhood where I'm living. It's kind of a bit of a slummy environment. That there's a lot of addiction and homeless people. And I've been a little bit concerned to see some of the comments online that there's a whole group of people in my neighborhood that are complaining about a lot of social housing going in here. And I mean, I mean, I don't want to get too political around this, but I think it's like social housing is probably a positive thing. But that's kind of, these are some of the issues that we're looking into right now. Is the basic Capricorn, I think, for one thing, has a lot to do with material survival. Um, I was watching a Alan Moore talk, and he was talking about how the tarot card of the devil is sort of associated with a materialism over everything else. And it's like, and that's kind of, I think, what we're facing here. The This sort of extreme materialism, or the predominance of the necessities of material survival. And um, in a time where Jupiter represents the greater benefic. It's like the help, the charity, the altruism, the in a compromised position, and it's been in this conjunction with Pluto for a while, which we're seeing all sorts of whatever murky stuff coming up from the underworld depths of Pluto there. Um and So meanwhile, we've got what's happening right now as I speak. Like, I'm feeling a little bit lower energy today. The other day I was feeling a bit more stressed out, but today I'm kind of like, it sort of feels like that moment before a new moon where you're just kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to be that productive today. I'm just going to like, just sort of like take it slow and take it easy. And I don't have, it's kind of like the release, right? The least release before the new cycle. But this new cycle that we're coming into is particularly defined by the challenges of coming up against this retrograde Saturn. And we can read this symbolically because of the tightness, basically, of that opposition between the Sun and Saturn, both being at the 28 degree at the time of the new moon. Um, we can look at the archetypes associated with these planets. Like the Sun has to do with the solar kind of hero. It's there's different levels of meaning to it. It can mean like the kind of illuminating, God conscious, the gold at the end of the alchemical journey. But in another way, it can also represent the kind of the smaller ego, the kind of self-oriented focus of like, this is me and this is what I want to do. And it's like the sun has a certain yang dynamic to it. Um, and the sun, if what do we associate the summertime with? Like sunny weather, everybody loves the sunshine. It's kind of like, it's time to live it up, right? Time to enjoy yourself, time to like, good vibes only. I feel like, like I see people sometimes would have like, they're like, I don't know, there's a whole thing of like, oh yeah, just good vibes only, don't harsh my vibe, man, we're here for a good time. And this like that kind of stuff, I feel like, is gonna kind of coming up in opposition to the real circumstances that we're faced with the lockdown, with the coronavirus, with all the politics that are going on in the world. And I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm not really entertaining the conspiracy theories, but I mean, I'm not really trying to position one sort of answer here as being right. What I'm trying to say is that there's room for people to relate to this in different ways, but regardless of how you relate to it, you're kind of encountering the same dynamic one way or another. Whether you, I mean, at this point, the coronavirus does seem pretty serious at this point, and I think anybody who like there's the amount of people who have been saying that it's just a fake thing, that it's not dangerous at all, seem to be quieting down a little bit at this point. At least that's my perception of it. Um, but th- those kinds of things, the peak of like cancer represents a kind of abundance, right? Like the flowering, the blossoming, the blooming of the fruits of your labors and stuff like this, and like the kind of the summertime celebrations and festivities and stuff. And the retrograde Saturn there, that it's like it's in a direct kind of, you it's all this stuff is happening in relation to the circumstance of, which is very limiting, which doesn't, it's sort of like the warm, happy, festive summertime thing is at odds with this cold, kind of grim Saturnian dynamic. um but I think there's also some potential for some, I mean, I'm not the first person to say this, but like having a bit more of a time out to reflect on things is, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Especially when our culture is so, it seems like it's so easy to get pulled into this commercial consumer, like we just want stimulation, we want everything now, give instant gratification, like grind hard and achieve your dreams. And it's all, this is all very yang stuff, right? It's the yang predominance of striving towards success and celebrating and joyous sunshiny things or whatever. And that is coming into a direct conflict with the cold wintry thing of, let's say, the person who is, you know it's like maybe the frat boy has the summer kegger, but maybe the old man has blown out his liver and can't drink anymore, right? Then that's sort of like these kinds of realities which we would associate with like the senex, the kind of the puer senex dynamic, where the kind of the eternal youth, and like this sort of like there's a sentimentality to cancer. There's sort of like the the golden days. I think there's got to be something in, I mean, people have talked about how there's an Aquarius wants to like recapture some golden age that's been lost, but I feel like there's some kind of like there's got to be some level of golden age sentimentality there with Cancer, right? Like it's sort of like remembering back to like the sweetness of childhood and wanting to create like an abundant like like that warm and cozy abundant atmosphere and stuff like that, but like that is being in a direct conflict, being a direct test with the realities of sickness, death, decay, and also I think the problems. It's all the Capricorn also has to do with the structures of power, right? One of the basic principles of Saturn is that it also represented the bones, like the skeletal structure, like the and this could not just literally like the bones in a person's body, but what's the structure that is supporting all the stuff that happens in our society, and how are those structures, what happens, like everybody's afraid of things, like so far thank god we haven't had things like a big food shortage, right? But that's one thing, like I'm like, well, what can I do to help the stress, right? Like I'm all stressed out about the situation. Like it feels good to go in and work in the garden and get some food planted, and I don't know if I'll have enough to survive on if it's like if there's something like that happens, but it's by putting my work into doing stuff like that that at least sort of feels like I'm doing something that builds the skills, right? To be able to be if the structures crash or if the things were dependent, like what's your basic own you know sense of being independent or enterprising with the basic necessities of survival. And I think that's very much the Capricorn kind of attitude, right? Like there's a kind of, I'm relating to Capricorn as a kind of like survival in the face of bleak circumstances and stuff like that, where it's not exactly like Cancer is more of like we want like what's the most abundant and fruitious kind of thing that will the kind of the sunshiny summer idealism. And so this dynamic is really getting highlighted here in this particular lunar cycle. Not to mention the whole thing about I did another video earlier on the square between Mars and Mercury. And so the square between Mars and Mercury is just going to add, there's going to be certain frustrations probably that are going to be coming out through communication, through online exchanges. And it's sort of like this is all has to do with this. We were talking about the T square here. If I push it forward a bit, like I've got these aspect lines on here, and it's a bit of a mess, to be honest. Here you can see the quarter moon is really setting off a kind of a grand cross configuration. It's not the most perfect. It's not necessarily, but perfect aspects. But you can see where's another one like this. If you go down here, yeah, like around here, you can see the T square kind of pattern coming out with Mars. Here, Mars at some point later on this month, Mars will be applying a square to the retrograde Jupiter as well. Here you have exact perfection square between Mars and Jupiter. So it's like Mars is also getting in on all this. Especially around the time of the full moon this month. It could be kind of a gnarly full moon. But the good news here, though, at least is between a square between Mars in Aries and Jupiter and that whole lineup in Capricorn, is that it's more of like an Mars in Aries is empowered, but the square is kind of is taxing. Basically, it's decimating Mars, right? So in a way, that could be like a good thing because it's taking away Mars's ability to act and do Mars things to be in this square with these Capricorn planets. Part of, I think, all the anger and animosity and bitterness is that we're frustrated with the circumstances. so that's kind of goes both ways, is that we're frustrated with the circumstances, and that could make us more aggravated and more kind of acting out or lashing out or what, or but it's also, the whole thing is the circumstances might also put a check on how much we can lash out and how much we can cause trouble, right? It's sort of like, um so I'm kind of but it could also be, Mars could try to feel that pressure, and that pressure could really push something out or whatever, right? That kind of tension of like, I'm being frustrated and I really want to break out from these restrictions, these kinds of things. I've feeling trapped, feeling cornered in, and wanting to like break out of it. Um, and yeah, I'll go into this more of these dynamics when I take more a look at what's coming up in the month of August. But I thought this would be at least a little preview of this new lunar cycle we're heading into and some of the dynamics that are at play.